There are a few phones out there that really stand out, whether it's for things it can do or the memories that it brings. For me, the Samsung Note 10 Plus bring me back to 2019, which was filled with fun and adventure, all to be stopped because of the pandemic. For me, the idea of this phone is priceless because of what it brought me. But then we fast forward and we move the question to everyone else and figure out if it's worth it for you. Should you buy the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus 5G in 2021? Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review. Check out the social media listed above if you want to talk tech, and subscribe if you want to continue watching tech. Let's get started. Honestly, I don't remember the screen actually being this big. We are given a curved 6.8-inch 1440p OLED display, giving us 498 pixels per inch, as well as a 60Hz refresh rate. It wouldn't be until 2020 for Samsung to make a high refresh rate screen in their flagship phones, and 2021 for the screen to get that at 1440p, so 60Hz isn't the worst, but it doesn't make it a good thing today. As for everything else though, absolutely the best. Very vibrant colors and overall a well-rounded phone. But in 2021, the refresh rate makes it feel kind of boring. This is what made me feel like the OnePlus 7 Pro was the better phone in 2019. But seeing this today almost turns my opinion into a fact, at least when comparing the screens. Regardless, nice looking screen with the signature note-styled, almost squared-off corners that we have been given since phones like the Note 8. It's a subtle design change that makes it feel more mature in my eyes. At the top, we do get a hole punch for the front camera, which I've come to accept. It's so high up, and dark mode generally hides it anyways. Then on the bottom, we get the ultrasonic fingerprint scanner, which I'm never really a fan of, but it works. Most of the times, the face detection works faster than the fingerprint, so luckily I don't have to use this that often, except for apps like banking. Then we do get S Pen support, which really needs no explanation. You're either in the camp that doesn't care or forgets that the S Pen even exists, or one that uses it for everything. If you're in the latter, then the best part about this experience is that it feels just like the Note 20 series and the S21 Ultra, so there's no FOMO there. Then we get the usual things like double tap to wake and sleep, as well as the always on display. It's really just standard Samsung OLED stuff. We're given edge panels like normal, but that software is pretty much in every Samsung phone nowadays. Overall, well-rounded screen, even though the corners are pretty much squared off. These are, at face value, spectacular sensors and always have been. The issue at launch was lack of originality, even though the ultra-wide cameras weren't common in Samsung phones, as well as that time-of-flight sensor. This is used for focusing and tracking, but Samsung sensors really haven't had an issue with focusing since the Samsung S7, so it's a strange addition. Not to mention that it was only used in the S10 5G and the Note 10 Plus and Note 10 Plus 5G, being replaced with laser autofocus in the Note 20 Ultra. Either way, we are given two 12-megapixel sensors, those being a wide and telephoto sensor, both taking some stunning shots, and even giving us this iconic photo. The last camera is a 16-megapixel ultra-wide sensor, which looks nice as well, and surprised me because I actually thought it was a 12-megapixel sensor. But let's show off some videos and photos, and add some music to it. The interesting thing is that the main sensor is the fourth and last Samsung flagship phone with dual aperture, something most people probably forgot about. The S9 was the first flagship from Samsung to feature this short-lived camera hardware. This was used to help with low light, but I never really saw much of a difference. As for video, it goes up to 4K 60 frames per second and is able to switch between all sensors when you're shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, but it's not the most seamless experience I've seen. Still, definitely better than the A51. We get live focus video, which is now called portrait video. Yes, Apple's version is better, but this does it at 4K. As for the front camera, it's a focusable 10 megapixel sensor, and if you've seen any of my videos in the past, you'll know that I love these types of sensors. Shots look amazing and actually focused. Not to mention 4K 60 frames per second will make these front-facing vlogs pop. And fun fact, it actually came with 4K 30 frames per second at launch, and 60 frames per second was added in a software update. Overall, amazing camera tech. It does lack a higher megapixel camera, 3 times or higher zoom, and even 8K video, but that's all fine given what most cameras were doing on phones during this time. They work fast, the main and telephoto sensors are optically stabilized, and best of all, that camera bump is so small that it feels kind of vintage. This is what makes the Notes so special, because there's a lot to talk about. Starting with the outside, we have a curved glass on the front and on the back. The type of Gorilla Glass here is not too important because the front and the back do scratch. Not to mention that this specific screen has been replaced on this phone anyways. But if you're wondering, it is Gorilla Glass 6. Really, Gorilla Glass never really matters because you can always find ways to break it and scratch it. This is all surrounded by a shiny aluminum frame, which is fairly durable and doesn't scratch as easy as you would think. On the right side, there's nothing at all, which is kind of strange, but that's because the power and volume buttons are on the left side. Yeah, it wasn't really Samsung's best moment because they reversed this design change right after this phone. On the top, we're given some weird things. So having a SIM and SD card tray is not weird, though they do support SD cards while the normal Note 10 doesn't. Then we have this hole for the microphone, but then we have this hole as well. It's for the top loudspeaker, even though it has a little area for the earpiece right here. And it's only one speaker, so the dual slot is kind of strange. It's supposed to add more room for sound, but it doesn't sound better or worse than my tests when compared to other Samsungs with this earpiece style. Then on the bottom of the phone, we get the usual, really, a USB-C 3.1 port that supports 45 watts of charging. Yes, faster than any of the more expensive folding Samsung phones that have ever been created. Another microphone and a second loudspeaker, giving us a nice stereo feel. Then we have the S Pen, and look, I can't tell you much about the S Pen because I never really use it. I tried, but it isn't as nice as something like the iPad's Pencil. Sure, this one is free, but it's like the 8th Note, well, technically 9th Note, to have a pen. It might just be the screen size for me, so I'm just gonna blame myself and wait for all the comments to say that this video is horrible because I don't know how to use this pen properly. Anyways, we can move on to the internals, which are top of the line in pretty much every aspect, and with 5G support. We get the top of the line at release, which was a Snapdragon 855 chip with 12GB of RAM paired to this phone, with a generous 256GB of storage, double that of the Note 20 Ultra and S21 Ultra. And remember, this phone does support expandable storage. Not to mention this is UFS 3.0 storage, which may be standard now, but it was one of the first phones with it, rivaling the first phone, which was the OnePlus 7 Pro. With this said, we got all of this on the 7 Pro for $750, while Samsung was charging $1,300. To power all of this and the added 5G support, we get the same 4,300 mAh battery that's found in the Note 10 Plus, which works fine, even with the 5G support. But don't expect 2-day battery life, especially if this battery hasn't been replaced before and you're buying a used phone. But no worries, like I said, you get 45 watts of wired charging, 15 watts of wireless charging, and even reverse wireless charging, so you can use this phone's battery to charge up other devices. Fun fact, 2 years ago when I was in Sweden, I didn't have a wall plug, so I ended up using the USB outlet to charge this phone, and then the power share to charge my iPhone. Even though it proves not to be the most reliable feature day after day, it worked out very well. As for the size of the phone, it's pretty much as big as you would expect. Notes are large phones, with this one being taller than any iPhone actually. As for the weight, it's somewhat heavy at 198 grams, but it feels lighter when compared to modern day flagship phones. This phone lacks a headset jack, being one of the first to actually do this in the Samsung flagship area, but it still retains IP68 water resistance. But this doesn't come without some faults. As time goes on, the water resistance will fail and become more likely to be exposed to liquid now that most phones are over a year old. Another thing is the NFC and wireless charging coil can fail, or the connector on the logic board can. Either way, this is something to keep in your head because if it does fail, Samsung will fix it, but it's definitely not going to be free. Lastly, the 5G models are actually different from each other, and pretty much if you want to use the ultra-wideband 5G, you're going to have to buy a Verizon one, as the T-Mobile and AT&T ones lack this hardware to do so. It's a strange omission, seeing that newer Samsung phones have ultra-wideband support even if the carrier locked to it doesn't support it. When I think of drawing on something, the last thing I want to do is draw on my phone, and that's something that I've always felt. When using this phone, I tried to use the S Pen again, and I decided that I need to use an iPad or literally pen and paper, because those end up being better options. I know some people love this thing, but for me, it really is a gimmick. Then we have the Bluetooth features, which have stayed really the same over the last 3 years of this pen, and those features are cool, but in no way does it help with productivity. Yes, you can use it for a remote for the camera or change pens in the Notes app, and that's actually pretty cool. But swiping up to raise the volume when listening to music or using it to scroll through the internet app literally just screams gimmick. Or when Samsung was making this S Pen, they probably figured out that they can do it and said, hey, why not add this too? This is what the Note has felt like to me, sitting in an area of giant phones that should have launched with the Galaxy S, but it's a way for Samsung to make more profit later in the year before major holidays. Instead of making a nice, solid Galaxy S device, they just added a pen to cut into the battery and overall room of this phone. I mean, they literally had to move the power button over to the left side of the phone for this thing that I use pretty much as a fidget toy most of the time. Sure, you can tell me, just don't buy this phone then. But Samsung doesn't make these styles of phones without a pen. The S21 Ultra almost got to this point, even supporting a pen, but lacks the design language that I love from the Note phones. Then we get the 5G aspect of the phone, which is weird to me. Everything about this phone is the same, especially the battery, processor, and shape of the phone, which generally get changed because of 5G support, but Samsung decided to sell the LTE and 5G phones next to each other in America at different prices. This may seem like Samsung was adding more choices, but it's really adding a higher risk of making someone feel like they're wasting their money or possibly even missing out on tech that may make the phone dramatically faster. And the funny thing about it is that 2 years later, we're given speeds that are on average 10 to 20% faster internet-wise, or in some cases, a loss of 50 to 80% internet speed when compared to LTE. To me, advertising the S Pen and all the stuff it can do never really appealed to me, but the design always looked so nice. So, should you buy this phone in 2021? I would say yes, but I could also argue no. These phones run at about a $400 price point and are beat by some phones with a Snapdragon 865 chip. I mean, you can get a OnePlus 8 for less than this phone, but your experience won't be the same. Okay, I would pick the OnePlus 8 over this phone thanks to that refresh rate, but in no ways would I trust the camera or software to work as well as they do on the Note 10 Plus 5G. The Note series have always felt like an adult version of the S series, feeling like a true business phone. And that's why it's easy to recommend the Note 10 Plus 5G in 2021. But I did really forget how annoying this phone was with all the buttons on the left side. And that's my review of the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus 5G. Also, that's a super long name. But what do you think about this phone? Were my opinions accurate? Let me know in the socials listed above, and as always, thanks for watching.